Now let's get into the why. Why is this tree different from your oaks or your maples? It all comes down to a process called biological nitrogen fixation, BNF for short. And I promise, even though that sounds like something out of a lab, what it really describes is one of the most practical partnerships you could ever put to work on your land. Most plants are hungry for nitrogen. Nitrogen is the green in chlorophyll, the fuel behind leaf growth, the building block behind the proteins and enzymes that make a garden vigorous instead of pale and stunted. The trouble is, plants can't eat the nitrogen gas floating in the air. The atmosphere is full of it, nearly 4/5 of what you're breathing, but that nitrogen is locked up in a form that most living things can't use directly. It's like being surrounded by resources you can't access unless you have the right key. Enter the black locust. It belongs to the Fabaceae family, the legumes, the same family as your peas and beans. But while a bean plant is a small seasonal worker, the black locust is a long-lived system with a deep, persistent influence on the soil. What makes it special is not that the tree creates nitrogen from nothing, but that it hosts the kind of microbial workforce capable of converting atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available forms. The key players are microscopic bacteria, often grouped under the name Rhizobium and close relatives. These bacteria take up residence in tiny nodules on the tree's roots, little living factories protected from harsh soil conditions. If you ever get curious, you can sometimes see those nodules by gently scraping back soil near the roots of a young tree. They look like small bumps or beads. Inside, the bacteria receive sugars the tree produces through photosynthesis. In return, the bacteria do the miracle work. They convert nitrogen gas into ammonia and related compounds the soil system can use. How much are we talking about? Exact numbers vary with soil, health, moisture, temperature, tree age, and management. But the takeaway is consistent, mature stands of black locust can contribute meaningful nitrogen over time, sometimes estimated in the range of a few dozen pounds per acre per year under good conditions. The more important point for the homesteader is what that nitrogen enables: stronger neighboring plants, improved soil biology, and a kind of slow, steady fertility that doesn't arrive in a plastic bag. And here's the part most people miss. The benefit is not just nitrogen in the soil, it's the stability of a living system. When you lean into biological fertility, you're building resilient soil that holds together better cycles, nutrients more smoothly, and supports plant health through the whole season, not just a quick flush of green after you spread pellets. That is the silent alliance at work. A tree, a microbe, and a soil community, cooperating in a way modern gardening often forgets is even possible. The black locust isn't some newfangled discovery or trendy permaculture buzzword. It's an old American workhorse, one of those species that earned its reputation the hard way by proving itself in the hands of people who couldn't afford mistakes. Long before anyone had access to bagged fertilizer, pressure-treated lumber, or a hardware store 10 minutes down the road, homesteaders had to rely on what would grow, what would endure, and what would keep paying them back year after year. Black locust was one of those rare trees that did all three. Botanically speaking, it's native to parts of the Appalachian region and the Ozarks, but it spread widely because people moved it. They weren't spreading it out of curiosity. They were spreading it because it solved real problems. Early settlers noticed quickly that Native Americans used it for tools and implements where strength mattered. That alone tells you something. If a people who understood materials at a practical level chose a wood for bows, pegs, handles, and hard-use items, that wood had to be exceptional. And the settlers learned fast what the tree could do for them. The black locust grows quickly when established, and its wood has a reputation that borders on legendary. In a world where fences were survival infrastructure keeping livestock in predators out and boundaries clear, the ability to make posts that wouldn't rot in the ground was priceless. A fence post that lasts decades isn't just convenience. It's time you get back. It's fewer replacements, fewer trips to cut timber, fewer days fighting mud and frozen soil with a post hole digger. That rot resistance is why the tree caught European attention early on as well. Historical accounts frequently note that black locust was brought to Europe in the early 1600s and cultivated by prominent botanists, in part because it grew faster than many hardwoods and had an unusual ability to resist decay. In places like France, it became not just an ornamental curiosity, but a practical tree planted, propagated, and used. Whether you're standing on American ground or European soil, the message is the same. People did not keep this tree around for sentimental reasons. They kept it because it worked. On the American homestead, it became a job tree. It wasn't planted just to look pretty. It produced posts, poles, and rails. It produced fuel, firewood that burns hot, and long, leaving coals that hold heat through the night. It provided durable material for outdoor structures where softer woods failed. And because it could thrive on marginal land, it often became part of the recovery process, used to bring life back to worn-out soils, stabilize slopes, and create shelter where the land had been stripped. That's why the black locust deserves to be talked about with respect, even by people who have concerns about it. It has a prestigious past because it earned one. It's not a miracle tree, and it's not harmless, but it is one of the most historically proven tools a land steward can choose if they understand exactly what they're planting and why. So if this tree is so valuable, if it builds fertility, produces durable wood, and pays the homesteader back in multiple ways, why don't we see it everywhere? Why did so many farms and rural properties treat it like a nuisance instead of an asset? The answer isn't as simple as people forgot. The answer is that we changed the entire economic and cultural logic of farming in the early 20th century. We didn't just adopt a new product. We adopted a new mindset that fertility should come from an external supply chain, measured in bags and spreaders instead of grown and cycled on the land itself. Around 1909 and the years that followed, the Haber-Bosch process emerged as an industrial breakthrough. Two chemists, Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch, developed a method to take nitrogen from the air and convert it into ammonia using extreme heat, high pressure, and significant energy inputs, most often tied to fossil fuels. That one innovation reshaped agriculture. It turned nitrogen, which had always been a biological bottleneck, into an industrial commodity. Suddenly, farmers could push yields far beyond what local manure, compost, cover crops, and legume rotations could reliably support at scale. And we should be honest about what that meant. It helped feed the world. It supported the rise of modern crop production and stabilized food supply in ways that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations. But it also came with a trade-off that many homesteaders can feel in their bones. It trained us to outsource fertility. Instead of building systems that regenerate, we began renting productivity from a factory, one growing season at a time. Once synthetic nitrogen became cheap, standardized, and easy to apply, it fit perfectly with the new direction of agriculture: larger fields, fewer hedgerows, less complexity, more machinery. The black locust, by contrast, represents complexity. It represents edges, living fences, coppice blocks, rotations, and management. It asks you to think in years, not weeks. And that didn't align with the post-war push toward efficiency and uniformity. By the mid-20th century, government bulletins and extension advice often encouraged farmers to remove unproductive fence rows and windbreaks to make room for larger equipment and straight, uninterrupted passes. Living systems that once served as boundaries, habitat, and soil builders were bulldozed. A tree like black locust, thorny, eager, and persistent, was no longer seen as a resource to manage. It was seen as something that got in the way, And that is the deeper reason we walked away. Not because the tree stopped being useful, but because the system stopped valuing the kind of usefulness it offers. We replaced a living fertility system, slow, steady, and locally produced, with a chemical system that is fast, predictable, and purchased repeatedly. The homestead question now is whether we can bring back the best of both worlds, respect the power of modern inputs, where appropriate, while reclaiming the biological tools that make a property more independent, resilient, and self-sustaining over the long haul. For those of us who've lived long enough to see good enough fail, we develop a deep appreciation for anything built to last. Not just because durability saves money, but because durability saves time, labor, and frustration. 3 things you feel more sharply as the years go by. And when it comes to wood that earns its keep, Black Locust stands in a class of its own in North America. Let's start with what you can feel in your hands. Black Locust is dense. It has weight. When you lift a fresh-cut piece, you notice immediately that it isn't flimsy, isn't spongy, isn't going to surrender easily to weather or wear. On the Jonka hardness scale, one of the standard ways we measure how resistant a wood is to denting and abrasion, Black Locust is commonly cited around the 1,700 pounds force range. That puts it above many familiar tough hardwoods, and it's a big reason it performs so well in high-stress uses like posts, pegs, and outdoor structures. But hardness alone doesn't explain the legend. The real magic is rot resistance. Black Locust heartwood contains natural compounds often discussed in terms of flavonoids, such as rhodonettin and related extractives that make it highly resistant to insects and decay fungi. Think of it as the tree's built-in preservative system. Where many woods become food for microorganisms once they're buried in damp soil, Black Locust heartwood refuses to cooperate. That's why you'll hear old-timers speak of locust posts the way people speak of cast-iron cookware. It outlived the man who put it in the ground. Depending on site conditions, it's not unusual for Black Locust posts to last multiple decades in direct soil contact, and many homesteaders claim 50 years is common, with exceptional cases going longer. The point isn't to argue the exact number. The point is to recognize what that changes in your planning. If you can set a fence line once and trust it, through seasons of wet springs, freezing winters, and insect pressure without chemical treatments, you're reclaiming a form of self-reliance most modern materials don't offer. That durability translates into several practical homestead applications. Fence posts. This is the classic use. You can cut, peel, and set locust posts directly into the ground without pressure treating. For anyone who tries to minimize chemical exposure on their land, that alone is a major advantage. Set them right and they become infrastructure you don't have to babysit. Firewood Black Locust is also a heating powerhouse. It's a high BTU wood that burns hot and steadily producing long-lasting coals. That matters when you're heating a home, cooking on a wood stove, or simply trying to keep warmth through the night without constant feeding. It's a serious winter wood. Decking and outdoor builds. For those who want a non-toxic alternative to pressure-treated lumber, Black Locust can be used for decking steps, rails, and other outdoor features. Over time, it weathers to a silver-gray patina that many people find beautiful proof that aging doesn't have to mean failure. Now, it's worth saying, this kind of wood changes the economics of a property. When you can produce durable material on site, material that would otherwise cost you significant money, you're not just saving, you're shifting from being a consumer to being a producer. And that shift is one of the quiet pillars of homestead resilience. Black Locust isn't just a tree, it's a long-term supply of infrastructure stored in living form, waiting for you to harvest it when the need arises. Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you the whole story. Black Locust is not a polite tree. It's a survivor, and survivors are built to take ground fast, especially on disturbed soil, poor soil, or any place where other plants are struggling. That's why some folks label it invasive and why others call it a weed. In reality, it's neither angel nor demon. It's a powerful tool, and like any powerful tool, it demands a safety protocol. If you simply plant black locust and walk away, it will try to do what nature designed it to do: colonize. It spreads through root suckers, new shoots that pop up from lateral roots that can travel outward. In a few seasons, a single planting can become a thorny thicket, and those thorns are not decorative. Young growth can be armed, and if you've ever caught a sleeve or a forearm on a locust thorn, you know it's the kind of lesson you only need once. So how do we harness the power without turning our property into a battle zone? The answer is management by design. You decide where it belongs, how it grows, and when it gets harvested before the tree makes those decisions for you. 1. The trench strategy: boundary control. One of the most reliable ways to keep black locust in bounds is to create a physical boundary around the planting area. A trench roughly 18 to 24 inches deep can sever wandering roots and interrupt the pathways that produce suckers beyond your intended zone. This works best in soils where digging is realistic: loams, sandy soils, and moderately workable ground. If your soil is heavy, clay, rocky, or full of roots from existing trees, trenching can be hard. In those cases, a managed block approach is often smarter. Plant locust in a designated area, well away from gardens, lawns, and neighbors, and accept that it is a coppice crop, not a landscape tree. 2. Coppicing: the harvest cycle that tames it. Coppicing is where black locust transforms from problem tree into productive system. You don't treat it like a forever tree, you treat it like a renewable pole and fuel crop. After establishing for roughly 2 years longer if your site is dry or poor, you cut the tree back sharply, either to a low stump or to chest height if you want regrowth above browsing height. The response is dramatic. The tree sends up multiple straight shoots that can grow several feet in a single season. Those shoots can become fence posts, tool handles, garden stakes, or firewood depending on size and your rotation. There's a second benefit that homesteaders talk about, and it's worth framing carefully. When you cut the top growth, you change the root to shoot balance. Some fine roots may die back and the system shifts nutrients. You often see a fertility pulse effect nearby over time, not because the tree is dumping a bag of nitrogen instantly, but because you are cycling biomass and stimulating turnover in the soil food web. 3. Chop and drop: turning growth into fertility. This is the simplest way to cash in the tree's fertility value without hauling anything off-site. The leaves and young twigs are relatively nitrogen-rich compared to many other trees. When you prune, you lay that material down directly as mulch around garden beds, orchard trees, or compost areas. It suppresses weeds, reduces moisture loss, and feeds decomposers that turn that green material into stable soil organic matter. A practical note: don't smother tender seedlings with fresh green material. Use chop and drop around established plants' pathways or under fruit trees and let it break down before planting directly into it. A homesteader's rule: distance is your friend. The simplest containment strategy is also the oldest plant: black locust, where its vigor is an advantage, not a threat. A coppice block on the edge of the property, a windbreak zone you're willing to manage, or a designated wooden post corner can give you the benefits without inviting chaos into your garden beds. Managed correctly, black locust stops being a beast. It becomes a repeatable system, one you harvest on your schedule inside your boundaries for your purposes. Before you go out and buy a sapling, we need to talk safety. This is the part of the conversation that separates responsible land stewardship from wishful thinking. Nature's best tools often come with a sharp edge, and black locust is no exception. If you treat it casually, especially around animals, you can create a problem that is far more serious than a few unwanted root suckers. Every part of the black locust, the bark, leaves, seeds, and even young shoots contains toxic compounds commonly discussed in terms of proteins such as robin and related constituents. The exact chemistry isn't as important as the practical takeaway. This is not a browse tree. It is not shade for the pasture. It is not something you plant along a fence line where animals can reach over and nibble when grass gets short. Who's most at risk? Horses are the animals most frequently cited as highly sensitive. Cases of poisoning have been associated with animals chewing bark, eating wilted leaves, or ingesting material brought into a paddock inadvertently. When horses are bored, hungry, or confined, they explore with their mouths. That single behavioral fact is why this tree should never be within easy reach of equine fencing. Cattle, goats, and sheep can also be at risk, especially if branches fall into a grazing area, or if pruned material is tossed where livestock can access it. Some animals may avoid it naturally, but you cannot assume avoidance, particularly when feed is limited. Poultry are opportunistic peckers. If seed pods or fallen leaves collect in a run, chickens and other birds may investigate them. Again, it's not something you want to gamble on. Humans, particularly children, are a different category of concern. The seed pods can look interesting, and children are naturally curious. A safe homestead is one where curiosity doesn't turn into an emergency. If you plant black locust, assume that someone will eventually pick up a pod or strip bark out of curiosity and plan your placement accordingly. Practical safety rules that actually work. Plant with distance in mind. The simplest rule is also the strongest: keep black locust well away from any pasture, paddock, or animal pen. If you have livestock, treat this as a utility tree planted in a controlled zone, not a mixed-use area. Control prunings and storm drop. If you coppice or prune, do not toss branches into areas animals can access. Collect stack chip or burn in designated areas. After storms, make a habit of walking fence lines and removing fallen limbs promptly. Assume pressure will happen eventually. Even if your animals have plenty of forage most of the year, there will be times, late summer drought, winter scarcity, early spring hunger, when they test anything they can reach. Your safety plan has to hold up during the hard weeks, not just the easy ones. Educate the household. If kids or visitors spend time on your property, make sure they understand pods are not toys. Bark is not for chewing, and this is a look, don't taste tree. The right way to think about it. Black locust is a soil tool and an infrastructure tool. It is not a food tree, and it is not an animal tree. If you keep that boundary clear physically and mentally, you can use it safely. If you blur that boundary, you invite unnecessary risk. This warning isn't meant to scare you off. It's meant to keep you in control. When you respect what the tree is and what it isn't, you can benefit from its strengths without paying for its dangers. As we look toward the future, the question for us as the elder statespeople of the gardening world is not whether modern agriculture worked. In many ways it did. It fed families through hard decades, scaled food production beyond what earlier generations could imagine, and helped turn scarcity into something most Americans no longer think about day to day. But there's another question that matters just as much on the homestead scale. What did we trade away in exchange for convenience? Because when a system becomes too dependent on outside inputs, fertilizer, treated lumber, fuel, replacement materials, it also becomes fragile. It becomes vulnerable to price shocks, supply chain interruptions, and the slow, creeping decline of soil structure and biology that doesn't show up overnight but shows up eventually. That's where the black locust becomes more than a tree. It becomes a symbol of an older kind of intelligence, the kind that builds capacity on the land itself. This tree points to a path where fertility is not something you purchase repeatedly, but something you cultivate carefully, deliberately, and with respect for ecological limits. Think about what biological really means in this context. It means nutrients cycling through living systems, roots feeding microbes, microbes feeding plants, organic matter becoming a sponge that holds water and breathes air. It means not just chasing growth, but building resilient soil that can handle drought, heavy rain disease pressure, and the swings of an unpredictable season. Black locust offers a bridge back to that way of thinking because it stacks functions in a way homesteaders understand instinctively. Fertility grown in place. Not because it replaces all fertilizer forever, but because it reduces dependence and strengthens the baseline. Infrastructure from the land posts. Poles, stakes, durable outdoor material, things you normally buy, delivered as a renewable crop if managed well. Energy, you can store firewood that holds heat in its coals, giving you warmth and capability when you need it most. And perhaps the most important function is the one people don't list on paper. It trains you to think in systems again. It nudges you away from the short-term mentality, apply, harvest, repeat, and toward a longer rhythm plant, manage, cycle, harvest, and regenerate. Now, this doesn't mean we romanticize the past. The past had hardships many of us don't want to return to, but the past also had principles worth reclaiming. One of them is nutrient sovereignty, the ability to produce at least part of what your land needs, without begging the market for permission. Another is durability, the habit of building things that last longer than a season. For many of us, that is what gardening becomes in the later chapters of life. It stops being about novelty. It becomes about legacy, about leaving the soil better than you found it, leaving systems in place that the next caretaker can understand and continue. Black locust, handled wisely, can be part of that legacy, a stubborn, beautiful tree that reminds us the future is not always found in a lab. Sometimes it's waiting quietly in a root system ready to work for anyone patient enough to partner with it rather than fight it. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this conversation, it's that the black locust is not a good tree or a bad tree. It's a consequential tree. It has real power to build soil power, to provide durable materials, and power to spread if you underestimate it. And the difference between those outcomes comes down to stewardship, placement, containment, harvest cycles, and an honest respect for what nature designed it to do. In the modern world, we've been trained to see land as something you maintain with purchases. You run out of fertility, you buy more. You need posts, you buy treated lumber. You need heat, you buy fuel. And if that works for someone's lifestyle, fine. But for many of us, especially those who grew up closer to the rhythms of seasons, there's a quiet satisfaction in growing capability on your own ground. That's what a tree like black locust represents when it's managed well, a step away from dependence and a step toward a more self-contained property. At the same time, I want to be clear, none of this is about chasing a miracle plant or joining a trend. The land doesn't reward trends. The land rewards consistency. If you decide to work with black locust, treat it like you would treat a wood stove or a chainsaw. Extremely useful, but only when you follow the rules. And that's also why I'd love to turn this into a real conversation, because this tree behaves differently, depending on region, soil type, rainfall patterns, and how people manage it. A dry hillside in the west is not the same as a wet pasture edge in the southeast. A small suburban lot is not the same as 40 acres with a designated coppice block. Your experience matters, and it will help other folks make wiser decisions than they would from theory alone. So let's talk in the comments. Here are a few questions to get us started. Do you have old black locust fence posts on your property? If you do, how long have they been standing and what condition are they in? Do they still feel solid at the base or have they softened over time? Have you ever used chop and drop with nitrogen-fixing plants? It doesn't have to be black locust, clover, vetch, peas, or anything similar counts. What did you notice? Better leaf color, fewer fertilizer needs, more moisture retention. For those who've dealt with the aggressive side of this tree, what worked best for containment, trenching, mowing suckers, planting in a dedicated block away from gardens. I'd especially love to hear from people with smaller properties because that's where mistakes get expensive fast. If you could plant one living fertilizer factory on your land, what would your biggest concern be? Safety around animals spreading into neighbors' yards, time and labor, climate suitability. Let's name the real issues, not just the marketing promises. And if you're watching this and thinking, I'm not sure I want black locust, that's perfectly fine. The goal here isn't to convince you to plant it. The goal is to give you a clearer picture, so if you ever see it on your land or consider it for a project, you'll understand what you're looking at and what it can do. Until next time, keep your hands in the dirt and your eyes on the sky. And above all, keep building systems that can take care of you the way you've spent a lifetime learning to take care of the land. Happy gardening.